Hello everyone and welcome to the Week 9 online class for ELA 300. Today I've got a couple of things to think about. I think it's worth making a start on assignment 3, and I'll talk about your assignments to date in general terms. And also I'd like to remind everyone that this week's focus is on information narratives. Just to remind you that there are not just fictional narratives, but also you can use narratives to support your teaching program across diverse curriculum areas. So you could be looking at the life of a particular historical figure, for example, or something that covers an historical event in quite a lot of realistic detail. So there are ways to incorporate these texts and kind of kill two birds with the same stone, so to speak, by covering students' content knowledge of a particular area or of a particular topic or event. Now, I don't need to go on about information narratives, biographies being, a classical one, just to remind you that the key difference here is that the events or characters represented in the novel that you or text that you might be reading can be real, and that why it's called a narrative is that it's a recount that brings into play literary techniques that influence the reader to take on a particular point of view or understand the behaviours of certain characters and empathise with them and so on. War narratives are an example of that, where the reader uses facts, historical facts, to build context or, follows the life of a particular individual and so on. So you can read about that in Wing Jan. She covers that quite effectively, and I don't need to go on about that at this stage. I think it's better to think about some of the feedback you've received on assignment 1, and for me to let you know what's happening with assignment 2, and also to review and prepare you for assignment 3. Let's start with assignment 1. You've all received feedback on whether you've completed assignment 1 to start with, and if you have completed assignment 1, then you've been given the go-ahead. Yes, in most cases there's no problems at all with the ability to make connections between theory and practice, or the ability to write and communicate ideas in a clear and grammatically correct, an academically appropriate manner. For those of you who've had some feedback with regards to recommendations to contact ALLSP, the Academic Language and Literacy Support Program, that's no indication of your, your capacity in this topic, or that it's no comment on your teaching skills. In fact, you may be a brilliant teacher, but I recommend you contacting ALLSP because they can improve your understanding of the academic writing genre. And in some cases, actually in a few cases, not in this particular unit, but in another unit, I have encouraged students to contact ALLSP for support with editing, support with structuring the essay. These are various different kinds of feedback students have received for understanding and interpreting the task instructions. And the other one was for referencing to avoid plagiarism. So just a few things to think about. If you're uncertain, please do contact the Academic Language and Literacy Support Team. Now, regarding assignment 2, which is something I'm sure you're all interested in, an update on, is I've received word from my mark. Unfortunately, the school can only afford so many markers. The markers are caught up across a range of units, and the marker has just informed me today that they finally finished marking the last unit that they had been assigned and are now making a start on assignment 3. This marker is particularly efficient. They've had huge workload, and I really appreciate your patience so far. And because he is quite an efficient marker, I imagine you'll be getting your assignments back within the next week if you submitted your assignment on time. Because I have advised him, or requested at least, that he mark the papers in order of submission date and time. So that's assignment 2. I'm sorry, I can't give you any more information on that at this stage. And that means that, you know, making a start on assignment 3, I understand that you would like feedback on assignment 2 before you do that. So if you feel that, depending on when you get your assignment back, if it's going to impact on your assignment 3, just let me know, contact me, ask for an extension, and once again, you know, we can negotiate, you know, what's going on, when do you need an extension, and all of those sort of things. Please contact me. That's the main thing, that I know what's going on. Quite happy to provide an extension, taking into consideration the issue with, you know, limited marking support and the huge numbers of assignments to be marked. Okay, so let's now turn our attention. Let's not stop in our tracks, because we're moving forward, and even without feedback on assignment 2 just yet, it's important to start thinking about assignment 3. And really, it's not going to impact much on your assignment 3, except for any feedback you might receive regarding your academic writing or your understanding of assessment tasks. So I'm going to make sure that you do understand the assignment 3 very clearly right now, and that will leave just the issue of your academic writing skills that you'll be waiting for feedback on. What I've got here is just a copy and paste from the assignment 3 task, and it says to prepare a 3 to 6 week unit outline that incorporates the explicit teaching of writing. Because it's a practical task, one that I hope you will actually use when you go out into schools or on your final prac, or when you are employed as a teacher, this is not something that I think you should take lightly, but I think you should develop this unit outline in a way that you feel actually prepares you for the teaching of writing in an actual classroom context. I know that it is important to get an understanding of your students' background skills and their background cultural knowledge before you design any unit of study. But in this situation, I think it's reasonable to say, yes, I will do that when I get into a school and I know my student cohort. That's exactly what I will do. I'll find out about their reading interests and all of these things. But at the same time, you've got a structure here that you can tweak and adjust in terms of differentiating or scaffolding further if need be, or extending students' learning. So that's why I've said that this assignment requires you to develop a teaching resource that incorporates the explicit teaching of writing, because really every unit should include an opportunity for the explicit teaching of writing. Assume an environment in which students are actively engaged participants. Okay, this will always be the case, because you will create a student-centered unit of work, one that requires students to do a lot of the decision-making and the teaching. And when I say that, I'm referring here to the use of whole class group work, so modelled, guided, and independent teaching and learning. Modelled because you're going to model the writing skills that students are to demonstrate, or model the texts that they are to produce, or even model the reading and writing, because, you know, reading and writing go together. So provide models of what it is your students want to write, read with your students, and get your students to identify aspects of the text. In other words, get them to work in groups and design tasks that require students to teach each other or to work with each other, to highlight unknown words, to explore sentence structure, to examine how the author produces a particular effect in the reader, how the author strongly communicates a point of view or uses language to inspire a particular or provoke a particular response in the reader. Yes, you do some modelling with either a similar text or a different section of the same text, but then you ask your students to do that with and for each other on another part of the text. Also, and this demonstrates scaffolding because it's modelled, the task is modelled, it's guided, it's either through large or small group work or just simple pair work. Think about your diverse students' needs as well. For example, the student whose whose work sample you evaluated in assessment task 2 should be one of the students in this class. It doesn't mean that you design the unit of work around that student. No, it means you design a unit of work for that student's year level. So if that student you said was in year 2, then the unit of work you are to design is for a year 2 student. You don't design it specifically for that, but to address curriculum requirements for that year level. The aim is to plan learning experiences that develop students' writing skills and engage them as writers. That doesn't mean it's a writing unit. As I mentioned here, the unit outline may incorporate other learning areas, for example, science or history, but all key teaching and learning activities will need to be cross-referenced to either content descriptions. So in other words, if you've got a unit in science or history and you want students to write a science report or do some historical research and produce a project, a history project, for example, then you can cross-reference the teaching of factual or fictional or whatever it is you want them to do, writing, to the Australian curriculum. Doesn't matter which subject the unit is for. This is the important point. It does not have to be a writing unit. It can be for any subject area. But I would like you to cross-reference to a relevant content descriptors or curriculum outcomes for the Australian curriculum English or general capabilities literacy. Okay, so have a look around the CARA website. This is to encourage you to understand the requirements of cross-curricular literacy requirements, but also, you know, how can you cover English in other content areas as well. Or it can be an English unit of work. It's entirely up to you. And so make sure that you're very clear about the age, I shouldn't say age range, the age group, sorry, age group. Refer to Assessment Task 2. You evaluated a student work sample. That's the year level you should be working with. Explain whether all students are of the same, skill level. If you assess that student as being a competent student at that year level, competently meeting English requirements, curriculum outcomes, then you might want to say that there are, however, a diverse range of student learning needs that you are catering for in that unit of work. You don't have to, but that will, increasing the complexity and being able to address the complexity of the student cohort for which the unit has been designed, means that you will then receive a higher grade in the assignment. Keeping it simple is fine, to make sure that you pass. Feel free to adjust as you feel, as you can manage, put it that way. Keep in mind that the student, and this is important, whose paper you evaluated in Assignment 2 is one of the students for whom your plan is being prepared. So these are the things you need to think about before you start. Now, what to include in your unit plan and how to set it out. All teachers are teachers of writing. As I just mentioned, your lesson plan your unit plan does not have to specifically be a plan for the teaching of English, but it must have an explicit writing component that demonstrates your ability to systematically develop your students' writing skills over a period of 3 to 6 weeks. Depending on the subject and year level, of course, that you're planning for. Your unit outline should demonstrate your ability to apply your analysis of one student's writing to inform the development of a unit of work. If you know that you've got this student in your class and you're doing, say, maybe one of the tasks you want students to do is to prepare a maths quiz for their peers, well, there's writing there. And you need to make sure that they use the appropriate genre, and you need to develop their understanding of that genre and their writing of the quiz that they're developing for their students. Think about the assessment tasks in your unit outline. If there is any writing involved in those assessment tasks, that's what you need to scaffold their skills. They're the skills, you need to scaffold. The writing skills you need to scaffold, along with content knowledge, of course, depending on what your unit is about. Now the point I want to make here is that your unit plan is to be only briefly outlined. I don't need all that. You don't need heaps and heaps of stuff at the start. I want to make this easier for you. You'll find that, for example, when I look at the rubric, where is the rubric? Hang on, let me rush off and grab the rubric. Okay, the actual unit outline is not assessed, and I'm going to go through the rubric just to make sure I'm giving you the right information. So don't worry, we'll focus on that later. Key principles of a balance discussed. Discussion considered. No, it's your discussion that's going to be assessed. But the discussion is only as good as it elaborates on and explains your unit outline. So there needs to be sufficient clarity in your unit outline so that when I read the paper, I can make clear connections to specific aspects of the unit outline. Okay, so you can use any planning template that suits your purpose. You might already have a lesson plan there that you can critique. You can use the optional unit planning template provided for you. I will make sure that I provide a link to the unit planning template in the Week 9 module, in the module for Week 9, and include at least one unit outcome related to writing. Very important. So that forces you to identify where is the writing in your unit outline. You might find that there's quite a lot. You'd be surprised how much writing there is in other subject areas. Attach the unit outline as an appendix to your essay, not separately. It should be part of the one. Just copy and paste it. It doesn't matter if it goes sideways, you know, that's no problem at all. Just so that when the marker opens it, he doesn't have to create folders and to keep things together. He can just put a name on it and he's got a copy of your essay in the one. Otherwise things get lost and all kinds of, you know, misunderstandings can occur. So make sure that you attach the unit outline as an appendix to your essay, because that is what we are going to use to understand the points you raise in the essay and see if there is evidence to support the points you make in the unit plan. Here we go. The unit plan will not be assessed, so don't panic about the unit plan, but do think very carefully about it. That's the whole point of the essay. It is essential that you complete it thoughtfully. This is the unit plan, as it will serve as the basis for your critically reflective essay. So it's an essay, but in it you're going to critique, review, evaluate, and critique that lesson plan. And here are some ideas with, you know, what you can address. Explain how your unit of work caters for the student whose work sample you analysed in assignment 2, as well as the hypothetically, and this is where you can make it as complicated or as simple and manageable as you need to, as well as the hypothetically diverse learning needs of other students in the classroom. Describe in detail, this is in your essay, your role as a teacher of writing with regard to the implementation of your unit of work. So what does the teacher do in this unit of work that you've developed? Well, often what I see are a set of instructions. The student does this, the student does, they watch this, they do this, but they don't explain what the teacher does. And this is crucial because this is about teacher pedagogy. This gives you an opportunity to really explain your pedagogical approach. Support your discussion with references to the scholarly literature on the teaching and learning of writing skills in particular. So let's say that you as the teacher are careful to first model the task, the writing task for your students, and then you carefully organise students into pairs or groups, and you give them this particular task. Okay, it might not be obvious, so you might say, in week 3, I begin by, so you might say, I'm scaffolding this writing task because in week 3, where it says X, Y, and Z, this is where I model, guide, these are the groups I develop, and this is why, and then you reference it to the scholarly literature. This is just an example of what I mean. By describing your role as a teacher with regards to the implementation of the unit of work. Focus on bits of the unit, say, in week 3, lesson 2, or it depends on what's there, of course, in the unit plan. This is where I do this. Then describe that in detail and support it with the scholarly literature. Consider some writing-related issues that could emerge as you implement your unit of work. If, however, I find that my students do not have this background knowledge, or if I find that students are struggling to develop their ideas in sufficient depth, okay, it depends on the year level and what the learning outcomes are, keep those in mind, then you might reflect critically on the issues that could emerge. They won't be able to keep up. They won't understand the reading. They won't be able to edit. You know, what are the issues that might occur, and how could you address them? Where might they occur in the unit? Always be referring back to the unit. The more tightly you relate your discussion to the unit, the better, because your unit is the evidence base. The discussion is will explain, hypothesize, critique, evaluate, and improve on aspects of your lesson. Make detailed connections between not only your discussion and specific points in the lesson, in the unit outline, but also between theory and practice throughout the essay. Now, the assessment criteria refers to balanced literacy approaches and how they're applied to diverse classroom contexts. The importance of addressing specific teaching and learning requirements from the Australian curriculum. And without, just focusing, I'm going to have a whole class on writing and I'm going to be looking at grammar. That's not balanced. Balance I've discussed in terms of reading, writing, speaking and listening, maybe viewing. I've also discussed balance in terms of the 4 resources, so basic skills, text user, text participant and text analyst. I've also mentioned a balance between teacher and student centered when I talk about teacher modeling, and then guided reading, writing, speaking and or listening, and before independent or group, and then independent and so on. Also, well, I suppose I could go productive and receptive modes. I think I've covered that. What else? Oh, focus on various text level structures, maybe not all at the same time. Again, depends on the year level of your student and what you feel they can or is appropriate to focus on. So whether it's whole text, paragraph level, sentence level, or word level, focus. And depends, once again, you need to argue and explain why you are focusing on a particular level, and you need to explain that in the context of a specific part of your unit outline. So it's tying practice and theory together all the way through. That's what will get you the highest mark. Express an informed view of the role of the teacher in establishing effective writing environments in diverse classroom contexts, and you do that by always drawing from the literature that we've covered this semester. Okay, so here's the rubric. I haven't got the pass or the credit. I've just got what's easy to read, so I'll look at the credit. Key principles of a balanced literacy program are described in close connection to the 3 to 5 week plan. I also have a really nice introduction which blends into an overview of what the key principles of a balanced literacy program, what some of the, you don't have to be totally, have every single thing you can think of, but, just the key principles are described. But often it's not connected to the 3-week program. So you can introduce all of the principles that you can think of. Please go back to weeks 1 and week 2, I think I discussed there. And select the ones that are most relevant to your 3 to 5 week plan. So this is what I mean by cohesion. Make sure that you don't stretch yourself too thin establish the parameters for your discussion. This is what I'm going to focus on. I know that it's important to consider all of these things when planning long term, but this is only a 3-week unit outline or a 5-week unit outline, so I can't cover everything, so I'm going to focus on this, or X, Y, and Z. Express an informed view of the role of the teacher in establishing effective writing environments in diverse classroom contexts. This is, sorry, I'm looking at going back to the criterion. And I've made a note here that this criterion is closely tied to the criterion above. For example, if you identify a number of elements integral to a balanced literacy approach, then what are the implications for you as a writing teacher in this particular teaching context? So I'm talking about the unit, not generally. If you talk generally, you won't get a credit, but if you connect that to the unit of work that you have designed. So the discussion considers the role of the teacher, so this is fairly general, for establishing an effective writing environment. Here comes the specific, for the student assessed in assignment 2. So taking into consider, well, how does this student need to be supported if they, they weren't strong, their paper wasn't strong, the work sample indicated lots of issues, then where are opportunities for addressing those issues during this unit of study? The discussion is supported by examples of practice. Can you give me some examples of how this is done? So, and you might say, in lesson 1, I would, with your units, with your lessons, I recommend you do a minimal of what happens at the beginning of the lesson with 1 dot point. So, lesson start, teacher models such and introduces such and models blah. And at the end, whether it's a general task or a summary, just a general dot point, 1 sentence, how will you finish this paper? And in the middle, what is the learning, teaching and learning? How is it organized? Organize students into group to blah, blah, and blah, for example. It can be very succinct, and all of that can easily fit on 2 pages, 2 to 3 pages. But of course, that's your unit outline. And I'm not assessing your unit outline, so don't fret. If it's not obvious in the unit outline, make it obvious in your discussion. The more detail you can fit in your unit outline, the more convincing your discussion will be. But if there's very little in your unit outline, then you have to fill in the gaps with the discussion. So it's a balance, how much information you put into the unit outline versus how much information you put into your essay. You could say, look, there is no evidence of me doing this. On reflection, I need to X, Y, and Z to improve the unit outline. Something like that. I know you can't fit everything in. Again, remember the unit outline is not assessed. The essay on the unit outline is assessed. And so, how do you demonstrate the capacity to design a balanced literacy program in connection with the Australian curriculum? English, remember this is about English. Well, you reflect critically on the unit outline, but that doesn't say much, does it? By how well do you address the learning outcomes, the curriculum learning outcomes in your lessons? So hopefully you will have some Australian English literacy learning outcomes in the unit. If it's not an English unit, you'll have some writing outcomes at the very least. Reflect critically on how well those writing outcomes are addressed in your unit. Demonstrate knowledge of standard Australian English because it's very difficult to teach, to edit, and to explain errors in students' writing if you're not familiar or you don't have a strong grasp of correct sentence structure, of correct grammar, punctuation, spelling, and so on. And this is why it would be good if you could edit your paper very carefully, and ALLSP will help you with this. They won't do the editing for you. They will encourage you to learn. That's what they'll do. So please review. Make sure that you've checked your paper for grammatical errors. Again, read it out loud. If English is not your first language, that is going to be a challenge. So please look for support, either a peer, someone who is willing to look at and read the paper for you. I've had people say they've asked teachers to read papers and they've come back with errors. So, you know what? I really recommend the ALLSP, Academic Literacy and Language Support Program. Make sure ideas are clearly and concisely communicated. Don't go around and around repeating the same thing, because that kind of padding actually makes it harder to see a clear train of thought. It hides the important information. If you're not 100% comfortable with referencing and researching, please contact the library. They'll be a wonderful support. They'll help you also with referencing. If you don't want to go to the Academic Language and Literacy Support Program, the library is the way to go. Alternatively, if the Academic Language and Literacy Program will help you to avoid using large quotes, because big sections of quotes is that's not what's assessed. What's assessed is your work. So use quotes simply to support in-text referencing. Use in-text references rather than quotes. That's my recommendation. That demonstrates higher referencing skills and writing skills. So I think I've covered that, and perhaps the questions you'll be asking, and I'll look at the question and answer discussion board. I've got to head off at 6, but I'll look at it, if not tonight, then tomorrow, and make sure that if there are any questions there, I will certainly get onto it as soon as possible. I might even post the unit outline to the question and answer discussion board. Okay, so that's it for now. Bye, and thanks for listening.